All right. Welcome to another DFW Running Talk. I'm Chris Detzel, and today I have special guest Libby Jones from The Active Joe. Libby, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on, Chris. I was so flattered to be asked.
I was so excited that you said yes. You never know. Some people might not want to do podcasts and talk about running and whatever. Maybe you've not done it, but I think you've done some of these before in the past. No?
They're never easy though, because you're having to talk off the cuff. And especially when it's done, you have planned is that you're not just going to just keep asking me questions over and over. We're having a conversation about
Yeah.
the sport we care about. And that means it can go in lots of directions. And that's a little vulnerable and scary.
Look, the way I see it is, let's say we're running together when we're jogging and we're just having a conversation. And that's how I like these to go is you're just saying, hey, you're in this thing, you're doing these things. Let's talk more about it. And that's always how I hope these conversations go. And we'll try to make it as easy as possible. How about that?
Okay, thanks.
But you've been in the running community for a long time, and I'm excited to understand your journey a little bit. And look, we'll talk a little bit about some of your races that you're doing and how you got into all that. But I'm first just interested in you and you as a runner and how even got into it.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting that I'm hitting a phase of my life that people know me as a race director or maybe as a member of their community, but they don't know me when I was a running club president or when the Active Joe originally was helping running clubs with merchandising before it was even a racing company. And when I was an actual racer myself. My running days are unfortunately over after a very bad leg break right at the beginning of the pandemic.
Oh,
Mhm.
man.
I needed full ankle reconstruction surgery. I broke through both bones in my lower leg. Just a freak accident playing soccer with my kid.
Oh, that's terrible.
I have a pound of metal in my leg. I have 8 or 9 screws, a 6-inch plate, a 6-inch rod. And you add to that a pandemic where physical therapy wasn't as available. For a lot of that, I had to relearn how to walk on my own after 4 months.
Awesome.
And so my shin muscle never really healed very well over the plate. Any attempt to flex that leg at that angle you would to run, I
Yeah.
think incredibly painful. So I know some people wonder why they don't see me racing, but what a lot of people don't realize is I was a runner starting back in 2005. And I've completed 38, I believe, marathons or ultras.
Damn. That's
And
pretty awesome.
and I've completed that level of distance in half the states.
So go back a little bit. Let's talk about how'd you even get interested in running? What made you decide, hey, I want to go run?
It was a friend who decided that we were going to go do the St. Patty's Dash Down Greenville.
Uh-huh.
It's such an institution in Dallas for so many years, and this was 2005.
Going on forever.
And no, 2004. And she said, and we're going to run every step of it, having not trained at
Okay.
all. And the runners were going to find that's really ridiculous that there's this terrible hill in the 3rd mile as you're coming back to turn on to Greenville to finish the race.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing the mile 3 marker and going, oh, dear God, I can't do a 3rd mile.
I think
Well,
5Ks are the hardest.
and then you make the turn and the finish line is right there. You just can't see it when you're going
Yeah.
and you're at that mile 3 marker, and I'm dry heaving at the finish line. And oddly enough, it started with a completely untrained 5K. And the same friend had gotten me into long distance walking for a cause. We did the Susan G. Komen 3-day walk.
Yeah.
And
Pretty
so I
nice.
walked. Yeah. And so I actually walked my first half marathon. It was the Big D half, bringing back another race that doesn't even exist anymore.
I did the full. That's my first full.
I think I did
Crazy.
that half 6 times over the years, so it was
Yeah.
around a long time. But it also does mean that as a race director, I'm always so generous about being a back of the packer because I know what it looks like to have started out that way, or
Yeah.
even maybe because of injury, you're back to that way, or anything in between. But ironically, I thought, oh, great. Okay, now I'm a runner. I'm going to train for my first marathon.
Yeah.
I didn't do any of my midweek runs. I was meeting up with my long run group to do my long runs, and I ended up with the worst case of plantar fasciitis. And my arches had completely flattened, completely collapsed. That ended up taking 9 months of like constantly taping my feet. I was able to avoid surgery, but
Yeah.
I basically have had to physiotherapy my way through retraining.
Did you think it was because you didn't do your stuff, the runs during the week? Yeah. And you just
I
did too
really
much?
do. I got up to an 18 or 20 miler. It's just that was like all my mileage.
Yeah. So for the
So
week you did 20
we
miles.
know, we know that base is important, but when you're starting out,
Yeah,
there's so much emphasis on the long run.
there is.
It's just so easy to forget.
I remember when I first started out, probably I used to be a runner back in high school, but only did 5Ks. But then I quit for, I don't know, 15 years or whatever. And then when I got back into it, I started running just like very small miles. And then I was like, you know what? When I get up to 5 or 6 miles, I would run them as fast as I can every single day. And realize at some point, I think I joined the club or something several months later and realized that's not the right thing to do. You don't run as fast as you can every day or every time you run to get a PR. I didn't know.
And I think that's another thing that a lot of people do and don't realize. One of my tricks I always tell people is that you should be able to sing the alphabet and actually be understood.
Yeah.
And I think if all of us are always running as hard as we can, you can't hear it through the huffs and puffs, can you? And it's a thing you can test with yourself when you're alone. But what's funny is that by getting injured on my way to the Dallas Marathon, gonna be my first,
Yeah.
I ended up volunteering. Our group was supposed to be as a training run using the DRC, the Dallas Running Club half marathon in early November. Coming up, I think this coming weekend, in fact.
It
It's
is.
that time of year again. And so we were supposed to be running it, and I still volunteer because I'm now horribly injured. And before I knew it, I was a member of the club already. Before I knew it, I'd been recruited into, oh, okay, hey, you have a good logical mind for race directing. And like, it would be really great to get you more involved. And 6 months later, I was the president of Dallas Running Club.
That's great. That showed that they had some confidence in you. Now, Dallas Running Club is a club that is, they have 100% volunteers, right? And so I've been part of that club for a while and they tout that in a big way and great people there. And that's you. So I've been with the Dallas Running Club since 2013, but this was even way back.
Yeah,
right?
so we're talking 2005, 6, right in that range.
Yeah.
I ended up staying club president for 2 years, and I actually earned a Roadrunners Club of America award as outstanding club president in the whole U.S.
Nice.
Because in that 2 years, the club grew from 1,000 members to 4,000 that many. And it's
What'd you do?
actually where the
What was
training program started.
I heard that. Yeah. So what'd you do to, one, get 4,000 members from 1,000? That seems crazy.
Historically, and the other past presidents were wonderful people, and I look to them for so much mentorship, but the focus was on being a faster runner.
Yeah.
And the past presidents were almost exclusively men as
Yeah.
well. So I think that I had the ability to bring in a different demographic, but also we were hitting that age in like that 2006. I was 25, 26 at the time, and the previous presidents were always in their late 40s. So I brought technology. It was the first time that we had an online membership system. The first time you could do online registration for races.
But remember, online was fairly new, right? I mean,
It was so new that even when we got to 2013, people were still asking for mail-in registration. And I got in a bit of a legal tiff with a registration system company. Here's the dirt. I never talk about this, Chris. A lot of podcast people get this.
Yeah.
And I'm leaving the company because I never want them to come after me. But essentially, they were doing some shady things behind the scenes where unless you declared a year's notice, they wouldn't release you from being their using them as your exclusive registration platform. So
Yeah.
it would mean that you would literally need to cancel on the day of your race a
Hmm.
full year before and know that you weren't going to use them. And so purely out of spite, because they had to be my only online, I took only mail-ins for months and months. And there's pictures of my mailbox just full, because Leaders Double
That's
at that
crazy.
time was like 2,000 people. I got to revisit a little after when mail-ins were dying down, how terrible dealing with mail-in registration was. I never want to go back.
Yeah. No way. I don't. Does that even exist anymore?
There's still some old school ultras out there. They're
Okay.
the same ones that have a one-page web page,
Yeah.
and they're run by somebody that of several more years of seasoning than you or I typically.
Makes sense.
Those are still doing it, but it's not easy to find.
Yeah. I mean, for the most part, it's pretty much. So you grew it, and do you think it was one, like you said, it was mostly for fast people, but it was also for, there was it was a lot of men there and things like that. So you brought, hey, you're a woman, we run too kind of thing. And there's probably a potential opportunity there.
And think about it. This was also the era when we didn't have 50% representation in half marathons by
Yeah.
women. It wasn't until around 2012, 13 that we had surpassed that. And nowadays, I think it still sticks around 55% women in the half marathon.
Yeah.
Now, instead, the Active Joe is always working with ultra marathons, because in the 100 miler, we're still seeing that women are only about 15 to 20% of the field. And there's a lot of obstacles to racing for women for that kind of distance. So instead, Dino Valley hits about 40% women. Like, again,
So but just for our audience, the Active Joe is the race, or is the company, and you have a lot of races underneath that are mostly trail. I think you might have a road race or two.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, we were jumping ahead. But yeah, New Year's Double is actually the first race the Active Joe ever produced. And it's a 2-day road race, New Year's Eve and New Year's Day.
I ran it before. I got a PR there once.
Oh, I love that. And the idea was always like, hey, why are we getting everybody into the gym January 1st? How about October 1st? Why don't you come out and end the year with a race and then start the new year off immediately with a race? Because there are so many people that have a superstition or a general feeling that how you start your year is how your year will be.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that was like such a good example of then why would you not run a half marathon on New Year's Day?
That's what I said, and that's why I did it. But it's interesting because on that particular one, you have the New Year's Double. So it's that, but isn't it December 31st you have a race, and then January 1st? Is that right?
And it's actually 2 races on both days. You can do the 5K, and we totally finish the 5K before we start the half and full marathon. So people actually can do up to 58.6 miles over the 2 days.
Oh, well, there's that. I mean, I wouldn't think of doing it twice, but yeah.
Well, and it's so funny because it's a super flat course, but I always say that all of my races are meant to be challenging.
Yeah.
And the challenge in that case is the 2 days in a row, and to a certain limit, the monotony of it is, yes, it's a flat course, but it's a 4-loop marathon.
So let's go back, because we jumped way ahead. I want to go back, and we'll get back, trust me, to this, because I'm certainly interested in all your races.
Yes, there's so much to talk about.
No worries.
18 years doing.
Exactly. There's 18 years. So let's try to get 18 years into the 1-hour session here. But so you did the DRC stuff. I have a couple questions about that, because I think so interesting. You mentioned that they didn't have a race or a training program then.
Yes, Nikki Davis, Dave Bindi. There were a handful of people that are names that a lot of people know in area who were those first training program leaders.
Yeah.
And while it was like, hey, if we're going to grow a club, we need to also train them. It was the help of all those training program leaders that made it happen, but then further have kept it going, because it's still such a strong program.
What's up? It's the moneymaker, I would think, or one of the moneymakers.
Yeah,
Yes,
as a nonprofit entity, it's always so funny because not only did I become the president, but I then inherited over time the DRC half race production. That was my first
that's right.
race to produce. And in fact, in 2007, so 2006, I was like a volunteer coordinator under Paula Robertson, who is the race director who trained me. Paula was trained by Louis George, who owned Malou Productions and made
Uh-huh.
the Big D marathon that we were talking about earlier. And then Paula trained me. And then 2007 was my first year as race director of the DRC half. And I had, let me see, my baby, Marissa, who's now 16, was 8 days old when
Wow.
I directed my very first DRC half. So it's all my kids have ever known. Mom has bins everywhere, and there's traffic cones in the front yard.
That's all they've known. Just seeing stuff like that.
DRC was a special time because I do believe to a certain extent, because I know the club is not at that size, but they make a lot of their money for the year to keep things going through the
Yeah.
DRC half. And the training program was another way for them to do that. But it can be a little bit of a thankless job to be a race director because we had, I think, one of maybe still our biggest years of that race. 4,500 people of the 2 years that I directed. One year was huge. And it was like, oh, but we made less money. So you have to market in
Yeah.
order to bring in people. So then the next year was smaller and we made a lot more money for the club, but it was like, oh, but it was smaller. Oh, you can't win.
I think, look, the numbers are always the sexy thing, right? Is how many, 4,500 members, 10,000. Did you make money? And at the end of the day, it's got to be about probably a little bit of both. You have to have people there.
Exactly.
You still got to make some money so you offset costs and things like that. So you can, like you said, continue the programs. And look, in general, the membership is 2 years and then you move on. And
Yep.
some of those jobs that they do is intense. Like you look at just a race director, or like the race director, somebody that's, doing all the races and specifically, like you said, the DRCF, it's a lot of time and effort, right?
That's because even while the DRC half is a big signature race, they were putting on a race basically every month.
They
And a
were,
lot of those race directors had done that for years. And people would adopt a certain month or themed race, but that's so much effort to do a free race to your membership.
yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't always realize how much goes into that. So I'm glad you highlight that.
And the training program person that runs those things, talk about how much work and time. You have to find pacers, you have to find coaches. Then there's people emailing you all the time. And I know Nikki has done that before, and then Vishal and a bunch of other people. And I think somebody asked me, would you ever be into it? I was like, no, the routes, everything.
At least nowadays you can program them into your Garmin or Coros or Synco.
Yeah.
But way back when it was handing out the little turn-by-turn direction.
They still do that, right? They'll just send it. Yeah.
Assume everybody downloads it onto their phone.
They don't. They don't. People, the thing is, a lot of times the watches aren't perfect and people can't hear them. And so there's still opportunity within the technology. I think it's good. If you have a pacer that, I remember we had this pacer a couple of years ago and she would get lost because she only got her watch and she didn't hear it, or it gave her the wrong turn or whatever. And so people still carry the turn-by-turn directions. So
relying on your Google Maps too heavily. And then
Yeah.
the second that there's construction, you're just lost and you don't have any directionality.
Exactly. All right. So you did this stuff with DRC and did a lot of really great stuff. It sounds like you race directed the DRC half, and that obviously sparked your interest. What was
Yes.
next?
I then followed Paula Robertson, who had trained me. She, in the meantime, had started her own women's half marathon, Heels and Hill.
Okay.
And we went off and produced that together for another, I guess that would have been another 3 years, at which point I actually was getting into ultras right around this time too. I had stayed at halves for years and years. I hadn't even done my first marathon. So it wasn't until 2011 I even did my first marathon. And I have to say, I love the story about this because I think it's one that a lot of people will relate to. Is I signed up for the San Francisco Marathon.
Yeah.
So Billy, as
Let's
my
see.
very first. But while I'm having my glass of wine late at night, then I'm like, I'm not going to be a one and done because what if it's a bad, I'm a mathematician originally. So what if it's a
Yeah.
bad sample size of one? There should at least be a sample size of two. So the same night I signed up for Chicago 2 months later.
Jeez. You sound like I get so excited. It's, oh my gosh, I got to do more.
And then what was funny is it was also really scary because then I ended up blogging for the San Francisco Marathon organization my entire training for 20 weeks.
Cool.
I'm watching back in the days that blogs and early Twitter or
Yeah.
what everybody was watching. I actually live tweeted my first marathon mile by mile as I was
Live
going.
tweeted. I didn't know that was a thing back then.
I don't know if it, I mean, live Xing now. That feels somehow dirty.
You mean live, like you're sitting there texting while doing it?
No.
Or, oh, okay.
What?
I was thinking video because you do
Oh.
live video on all these things. I was like, I didn't think they had that. But yeah, that makes sense.
It was all, and then I would use it to create the race report blog of there's nothing more raw than 140 characters while you're running a race.
Exactly.
And then doing that 26 mile markers over. But then I actually enjoyed my first marathon so much that my husband and I made plans to go to Napa for a few days to decompress and let them recover. And while we're there, I was like, honey, please, I know what I want to do. I always said if I was going to run marathons, I wanted to go to Hawaii, go to Kauai and run the Kauai marathon because I love their medals.
Yeah.
And
And it's in Hawaii.
after San Francisco.
Oh, I thought you said Chicago.
And it was 4 weeks before she
Oh, man, Libby.
really went off. And my very first 3 marathons got me in Marathon Maniacs with 3 in 90 days. And I left him at home. That was the other thing is, honey, I'm going to Hawaii without you because the plane ticket's expensive.
A little too much.
And our kids need somebody to stand.
That's the thing.
And he's always been such a support. So yeah, I ran off and did these 3 marathons, and all of that was done in training for my very first ultra, which was Rocky Raccoon 50K in November of 2011. So I not
I
only
did the 50K. I did the first 50K. Rocky Raccoon. No, I did a 50K.
And
Anyway.
it used to be split. There didn't used to just be the February. They used to have a 50K that was completely separate.
Oh, okay.
That was
Yeah,
in November.
because they have a 50 miler and a 50K. And
Yes, and now they're all in the February time for.
yeah, that's right. That's when that.
So you've done it in the.
Yeah, that was the very first one on February, the 50K, and that's the one I did.
Yep, that was my first ultra, and then I was bit by that trail bug really hard. And
Interesting.
it's been a major focus.
Yeah, and so here we are now, like just a few years later. Then tell me more about what came up with the Active Joe. Like, how did you start thinking about that?
Yeah, so at the same time, I was starting to feel like I want to do my own vision. I've done races for nonprofits for years now. I've done clubs for nonprofits. I think I want to make my own race. As again, my husband was like, I'll be supportive, but I kept going. When would be the perfect first race is January 1st, 2011.
Yeah.
1-1-1-1.
Live. Yeah.
Is that a way to kick off? Like,
I like the idea.
yeah. My second daughter was born December 1st.
Okay. Look at you.
Before, by C-section, I wasn't allowed to lift anything at the race. I was still surgically recovered.
Jeez. All these things.
But it was wonderful. I announced it in like August, September. Okay, I'm going out on my own. I'm just going to make it like 200, 250 spots for just a half marathon on New Year's Day. And it sold out within 3 weeks.
And that's the New Year's double.
And now it's the New Year's double. Back
But
then,
before it was
a
that one.
day.
Got it.
And okay, more dirt. Because again, I don't talk about this stuff a lot. But there was a running story in Alice.
Nobody's going to know but us, by the way.
Of course, no one's listening. I'm just kidding. I know everybody's going to listen. But since you have DFW running group, that's like 10,000 people.
Yeah.
I know people are going to hear this and be like, oh. But I have no regrets for how everything ended up happening. And what was funny is that the New Year's Day half marathon in 2011 was held at a trailhead that had one of the only places that we could do an out and back half marathon in
Yeah.
out where I was living, just north of Dallas. And there was a running store in the shopping center right there. And of
Mhm.
course, it was great. There's a shopping center right there. It's New Year's Day. No one's going to be there. We got permission to park,
Yeah.
and the city was on board. And so after the race, I said, hey guys, I went to the shopping center and the running store shows up at the meeting. And I said, I would really love to do New Year's Eve and New Year's Day and make it like a double day. And
Mhm.
they said, if we can't own it, then we're going to say no and be very upset about this. And the
Mm.
shopping center said, I have to keep my tenant happy if they're
Yeah.
not happy.
Interesting.
And the city went, darn it. Like, this is a great idea. And so
Yeah.
the city found me our current venue.
Well, they did.
And
See,
they had just finished.
somebody's on
trail.
board, so that's good.
Yes. And what do you know? That's how New Year's Double was born. Is this running store could have had an opportunity to try to be a partner
Yeah.
and try to list it up. But
I think that a
completely-
running store, like with two races that are very prevalent or eventually, and people need shoes and stuff, running stuff, that would have been a perfect opportunity for them, whether or not they were owned it or not.
I feel like we were in an era too of a lot of competition for running stores
Mm.
in Dallas. There were multiple companies trying to get their market share. They
Yeah.
all had their own training programs. They all were making their own races, had their own timing companies. There was a vertical integration. This was something like Carnegie would have been like, yes, let's fight over this.
Yeah.
And so I think it's also just, I don't think it reflects poorly on anybody. It's just the way the time was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this market is actually, I've been around long enough and I'm old enough that I watched this happen time and time again, that there's certain competition levels or market share issues or saturation in a market.
Yeah.
And watching how that changes. The Rock and Roll Marathon Series.
Yeah.
What goes on with Ironman, Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc organization.
That was a big one.
Yeah. So it's like we're watching the same things and history repeat itself, but it's with different organizations
Yeah.
and a similar mindset of less collaboration and less lifting everyone up and more, if I don't own it, then it shouldn't exist. Let's pummel it and destroy it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the mindset of the hardcore business person that just doesn't care about.
No,
Look.
such a good thing to say because I've always said that my company, that's the other thing is that unlike the other race production companies going around, is that I do this all as a volunteer basis, full time, because I'm a stay-at-home mom and I have the luxury and the privilege to be able to do that. And
Sure.
so we've given to charities. So we've given over $300,000 in the last 10 years to charities. But
That's awesome.
it also means that I don't have to follow a competitive or capitalistic viewpoint. And I've always instead walked around with the mantra of sometimes more isn't better. Sometimes more is just more.
Yes. Well, it's a lot of headache. Can be. I think to me, it just depends on what are you trying to do. And for some people, it's truly the love of the sport. And maybe they want to make money and they can, like you said, you can afford to do some of this. Some people actually do this for a living and teach
And they're
teach their
allowed to
own.
feed their families when they
There's-
work so
like-
hard for it. I completely,
Yeah, I don't like either way. There's some great running companies out there and putting on some great races and doing some really great things. Doesn't mean they're a bad person or whatever. It's just they just have different goals and different things. But like you
right,
said,
can bring out that competition.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
there's going to be competition and it's going to be stiff at times. And there's got to be decisions made probably from both ends. I'm sure if you had a race that you put on and 50 people showed up and your goal was 300 people, it might not even make sense for you to do that race again. Yeah, I don't know how that works.
No,
but-
that's so true because that's very much how some of my races have gone over the years. Dino Valley actually was in the negative for several years as we were trying to get the Western States qualifier.
yeah,
I refused to try to charge Western States qualifying entry fees because those have gotten very expensive for the qualifiers. But at the same time, So I didn't feel like I could justify that, but I needed to be able to put on a race of that size and quality. And
Mm.
so that meant running in the red, and also that there were even a couple vendors that took hits for a couple of years with the promise of, once we get there, I can pay you true market value.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that you care about this journey. And so that's a case where luckily my business model, in quotes, ended up helping the whole community. So it's just a different way to get to a result.
So let's talk a little bit about a race coming up that you have, Dinosaur Valley, right? And so that's what, November 23rd, looks like?
Yes.
And
Yep.
so that's 20 days away or 24 days away. So,
Don't give me a heart attack. Like, oh, this is the biggest year we've ever had of this race. So I am certainly feeling the crunch of, we had never sold out more than like race week.
yeah,
And now we sold out September 17th.
no
So
way.
nine weeks ahead of time.
You said it's a qualifier for
For the
Western
Western.
states. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a big push or pull, right?
Oh, yes. And I'm sure that's a big part of it. But also, we did almost no marketing, because while we are a qualifier, we are a very diverse race. And we pride ourselves on being not just an every race, like a race that is just like any other one. It's trying to really have its own vibe, just to say, as the kids would.
Well, there's this big dinosaur there, right? Like I've been there once or twice and run. Yeah. It's been a while since I've done it, but I did do the race and I think I did I don't know if it was like a 20K or something. I don't remember, but something like that, like closer to a half. And I just remember these dinosaurs. I remember the course it wasn't hard, but it wasn't easy.
I was going to say, I think you were doing it back when you had to cross the river. Did you?
Probably. Yes. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. When
Yep.
we no longer do that, because we had a year of like very bad flooding, like huge rains. And I think it was 2018. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, hey, crossing the river's not terribly safe if the water is all of a sudden mid-thigh.
Yeah.
Well, you had before it changed. It's so funny how some people hated that course, and then some people just absolutely love that course. But the 100-miler had to cross the river 12 times.
Wow. So let's talk about that. So one is that you got done with these marathons and everything else, and then you're like, hey, I'm going to put on 100-milers. Look, you got the New Year's double. Obviously, you have several races that have ultras in them. So tell me about.
Doing road half marathons. I had two road half marathons I was doing, and a 100-miler literally was my first trail race to produce. And it was Big Cedar, 2014. It was in a completely different venue, and it rained the entire weekend. And you have so few finishers. It was 12 finishers that first year in the 100, and everybody was mud coated. And it was such a beatdown. And then the next year, we're like, it's going to be better. And instead, 17 hours in, the fourth rainstorm poured over us and didn't leave. It just kept raining, and the flash flooding began. And here's the fun story. It feels biblical proportions, but it turns out all the copperheads go uphill when flash flooding happens. So where you think fine trail, and we're snake, and the rest of the time there wasn't trail.
Oh my gosh.
We penciled in the middle of it, and we thought, that's okay, 2016 will be different. And then 6 weeks before the 2016 race, we lost the venue to a property dispute by multiple property owners in Dallas, because this Big Cedar Trail is in South Dallas.
Yeah.
And 6 weeks before, with all these people signed up, and I'm scrambling for a race venue. Like, I'm asking everyone I know, what would be a good trail? What can we use? What can we do? And Dino Valley was one of the first ones I went to scout, and they were super nice and super easy to work with. And they were excited to have us there. So Big Cedar 2016, I think the shirts actually say at the bottom, at Dino Valley.
Yeah.
And we stayed at Dino Valley. I believe Big Cedar did finally work out all their disputes, but the trail system is smaller.
Yeah.
than it used to be. And we stayed at Dino Valley, and now I think this is going to be our 8th year.
Wow, that's pretty. So all right, 8 years for Dino Valley, but you have 4 overall events now. Is that right, or do you have more? Because I see 4 on the website.
It's 4 events that cover 1, 2, 3, 6 days, because Dino Valley is a
Got it.
2-day with race starts on both days. New Year's Double is a 2-day. But then I have Cross Timbers Trail Run, which I inherited from the wonderful Teresa Estrada.
Hmm.
It is the oldest trail race in Texas. We're at year 44,
Do you?
and I'm 44 years old, so I clearly could not have been producing it out of the womb.
I think I met her once.
Yeah, she shows up and volunteers at so many things. She is such a wonderful person, and she directed Cross Timbers for 11 years.
Yeah.
And then I took it over, I think, 2016, 17, right around then. And I've been producing it since. So it's one of those where it's just an institution. It's right at Lake Texoma. It's
Yeah.
gorgeous shoreline trail. Have you run Cross Timbers? I'm trying to remember.
Yes.
I feel like your wife has.
Yeah, she definitely has. I've been there, and I'm pretty sure I ran it. I can't. I'm like 90% sure I ran. So yeah, I don't really do certainly not 100 or 50 mile or anything like that. Usually I just do a half marathon. So close to that. I'll even do a 20 miler if I have to, but 20 or lower. So I think I did something there. I'm pretty sure.
And we do Cross Timbers we keep it alive, and we keep it safe for the future, that it'll always be there for everyone to come back
Yeah.
to or come to. And the other event I produce, we do another one at Cross Timbers that came out of actually the pandemic. In 2021, we had to cancel Cross Timbers because of we were having a surge of the Delta variant, I think. And we got to like November, and I said to Teresa, "Oh my gosh, have we ever skipped a year since 1982?" And she's, "No." And I was like, "Oh no, I can't do that to the longest and oldest trail race in Texas." So we did a pandemic redo 2021 edition in December, where I offered like a shortened course where you had the 5 mile, but then you also had a hill repeat challenge. And it ended up
I
sticking me
did that
on
one.
this. Okay, I can believe that. And so it was really celebrating Monkey Butt Hill, which is
Yeah.
right at the end of Cross Timbers race, right before you get to the trailhead.
Yeah, I
And so
did it.
it's like, I remember that. And it's a 20% grade hill.
All it is the same hill over and over. And it was fun.
Great for, I think.
Yeah, that's right. I forget which one. But yeah, it was actually pretty fun. I enjoyed it. So you're still
It's-
doing that one. Okay.
So we kept doing that, and we renamed it Monkey Butt Mayhem.
Yeah.
And we do it every May, and it's a case of, I think this year was the first year we broke even on that race, and we'd done it 3 years. But every year I was like, why am I doing this? We just like lose the company's money. But after the race, like, it's one of those suffer fests that everybody's just so
Yeah.
happy to suffer through.
Yeah.
That afterwards you're like, okay, fine, we'll do it again. My team loves producing it. I have
Yeah.
the best volunteer leads in the world. And for us, we call it our company picnic. Because it's just a nice day. It's May.
Yeah, it's probably warm, but it's good for the volunteers and yourself. It's probably fair outside.
Yeah, we would
Yeah.
rather it be in the 70s when we're volunteering.
Of course. Well, talk about that. At every single race, there's a lot of volunteers, no matter where you go. And one of the things that I continue to hear, and I think is true, is that your races wouldn't survive without the volunteers. And how do you, one, build that crew of volunteers? There's always kind of these people that will always be with you, and I'm sure you've seen that. But then there's always new people that come in. And is there a program that you have? How do you keep them incentivized and focused and excited?
It's really funny how organic I think that it both is and almost has to be.
Yeah.
Because again, I think if you're coming for a payday, you've picked the wrong race series. That's not the heart of my events. Is like people say over and over again how they feel that love. And so finding the right leads is really important, especially when I produce races that are a safe space for a lot of underrepresented communities in running. I mean, being Black and running out in nature, camping wasn't even available to a lot of the Black communities safely for a very long time. And there's been entire things out there on the internet that talk about that, about even to the point where Martin Luther King, way back when, wanted to go visit a national park and was denied entry.
Wow.
And instead, I believe he ended up in Canada and went to Banff. But that's within a lot of our parents, within their generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's still a thing that a lot of us don't talk about, is feeling safe when we're out running in nature. And as a woman, I know I've gone to Mark Cross Timbers one year, and because it's on the edge of a lake, all of a sudden I could hear that real raucous sound of a lot of men that have had a lot of beer.
Yeah.
And you don't know if the party is happening on a boat, on the like road on the other side, because you're in a wooded forest area. So I don't know where it's coming from, but I know I didn't feel safe.
Yeah.
And then you add to it the LGBTQ community. Being transgender is already an unsafe feeling in bathrooms and just
Yeah.
walking around in the day to day. But it can be even worse out on a running trail. So,
For sure.
right. So it's important to me that my volunteer leads are all people who have felt safe at my events at some point.
Yeah.
And then they wanted to be able to give back and help continue to create that environment for others. There's lots of races out there where people feel safe.
Yeah.
It's a lovely thing to go from all are welcome to all are invited, and that you're whatever identity you have, you feel like you were invited for that, not in spite of it. A lot of my team has grown over the years, but like Kenny Holman has been the head of the fence line aid station at Dinosaur Valley Endurance Run since the very beginning. And he inherited it because my very best friend, Jeremy Day, we were all trail running in the early years of the 2010s. And Kenny came out to help Jeremy at an aid station at my Big Cedar race. And when we moved venues, Jeremy wasn't able to come out, but Kenny took up the mantle. And he's been there since. And so that's 8 years.
Yeah. I mean, he's been a loyal follower ever since. He loves the races that you do. He loves you. It's obvious. So does Andy. He's a very big supporter of what you're doing. I love that.
Andrew Rose is a big advocate for the queer community, and it's something I admire so much about him, is that's deep in his heart, is that people feel that safety.
Yeah.
So he and I have bonded so much about that aspect, and just in general, like the love of the sport.
So intriguing. This has been a great conversation.
It's so timely, actually, because our volunteer lead and assistant lead group for Dinosaur Valley is basically doubling this year.
Wow.
So I've had to, a little less organically, but it's still, it came from an organic place of, hey, would you be interested?
Yeah.
I don't want people to just go and send me an email and volunteer. I would love that too, but more often it's like, hey, I've watched how you carry yourself, and I want you to be part of this.
Yeah.
So you're going to see some new leads and assistant leads at Dino Valley this year, including we have a foot care team even. We have a foot care tent this year.
Nice. My feet need some care.
I know I'll see you out there that weekend, because I think a lot of people in Dallas-Fort Worth will be out there that weekend.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's not all that far of a race, right? And that's the beauty about trail running is, one, there's only very few trails in Dallas. There's, 3 or 4. There's a couple in Fort Worth, 1 or 2 that are decent, but you have to go out a little bit of the Dallas-Fort Worth area to get some really nice trails. I'm not saying that there's not nice ones here in Dallas, but...
Okay, you're being too diplomatic. So for those not in Dallas that are like, hey, I want to know more about DFW running, the problem is that commercial development is king in Dallas, and that historically trails were only developed in floodland areas that were considered leftovers.
Yeah.
And that we're now dealing with some of that. As somebody who has recently moved to a new city, It's so weird to be in a place that has value keeping green space pockets of different types
Yeah.
for people, and that it was in its original construction. And Dallas just never really did that.
They didn't. And it's obvious. There's a few trails that are decent, but when you go to probably, I don't know, you're in Montreal, right? Or in Quebec. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm in Montreal.
Yeah, Montreal. Okay. I'm sure there's awesome things there. And then, when you go to Colorado or other places that have really nice trails, you're like, wow, we don't have anything like this.
Yes, where it
So,
was prioritized,
yeah,
like
yeah.
actually creating those spaces. But Dallas is now unfortunately in a place that there's so much commercial development, there's no spaces left to go trying to
No.
pull back. Even the city of Allen being there with New Year's Devil, I was actually the chair of the Parks and Recreation Board of the city for several
Oh,
years.
wow.
And I had a small stint as a politician in my 20s. And trail development was my big thing. So I
Yeah.
got very involved in the Parks Board. But
See, you should have said that earlier because that actually probably is your love. I don't know if it's where it kicked off, but part of it, that's the whole
you're
story. I
right.
love that.
It's actually before the running
Yeah.
came out. But I've watched them have to buy back tracts of land to be able
Mm.
to make connectors or to make new parks.
Yeah.
And that's even somewhere that's a highly suburban area that there's still land.
Yeah. It's too bad. What can we do now? But yeah, my favorite trail here in Dallas is Cedar Ridge is one of my favorites. It feels like that if it's there's some really good ones. There's Grapevine area. There's a nice trail out there, North Ridge. But
But I will
love it.
agree with you. I love Cedar Ridge, and I have spent many a day out there running escarpment repeats in my
Yeah.
years. And except you can tell the scarcity of trail by how packed that parking lot
Oh
always
yeah,
is.
it's crazy. It gets crazy on the weekends specifically, but is there something that you really wanted to talk about that I completely missed?
No, but I think the exciting thing for the future with the Active Joe is that, and I've touched on it with individuals, but never too much publicly, is that I am now living in Montreal. My husband's work has taught us
I was going to ask you about
taking
this.
us to
Yeah.
Canada, and I'm actually under an open work permit as a spouse, which also includes that I can start a company,
Wow.
which means the possibility that there could be Quebec races
Wow.
for the Texans to come visit eventually. I'm pretty excited about that idea.
You got me excited. Would love to go out there. I've been to Canada, but not over there, right? How awesome would that be?
I think their seasons are so different than ours
Oh
that it
yeah.
would give some great travel potential of, okay, you love Dino Valley, you do Dino Valley, you do cross timbers, and how about in June, you come up and enjoy the beautiful weather that we
Yeah.
have up here that's so mild.
Have you
The
started
biggest
looking at that or is it not yet?
Not yet, because a lot of people aren't aware how much of a French province Quebec
Yeah.
is, and it's become even more so the last couple years. It's
Yeah.
been said as an Anglophone that this was probably the worst time in the timeline to move here, considering none of us spoke any French.
Yeah.
I'm learning quickly by full immersion as much as I can, but I'm at coffee shop level French, and legally,
Man, that's pretty good considering you only been there for a few months or less.
in 2 months, yes.
That's not bad.
Just every day, and the baristas have adopted me at the coffee.
Perfect.
They appreciate that somebody wants to try, but you're legally required here to have everything in French as your first language, even though Canada's an English
Yeah.
language country. Quebec actually overrules that with.
They love the French nation.
And then even when you have English materials at a cafe, it's the font's only allowed to be a certain percentage size compared to the French. And so I have some fluency that I need to get figured out before I can go do that. Even when we bought our house here, the entire house closing had to be done exclusively in French. We
You have to hire an attorney or something.
Yes, and so the attorney actually has to say the whole thing out loud in French, and they're going, okay, I don't.
Well, I think a year from now, you should be pretty more fluent, I would assume, if you're going to practice every day and then maybe you start that journey then. And that's exciting though, I'm glad to hear that you're going to keep these races and continue that on, but then potentially expand.
Yeah, I get asked a lot if I'm going to keep my events, and I can't give them up. I I'm so particular about what I will produce that it makes it so hard to walk away.
Yeah.
Yes, I've moved away, but 90% of race directing is computer work. Registrations are all handled online. We do all of our social media.
Did you keep your house and was
We
it Frisco or?
Yeah, we were
Yeah.
able to keep the house. My husband's traveling back so much, and I'm traveling back
Okay.
so much that between the hotel and we
Makes
kept the
sense.
car there, that it ends up being quite a
I like
given.
that. I like that idea. My wife and I want to some point maybe move to Boston, but keep the house here and maybe a car here and then just go back and forth if needed.
Yeah, we've been here 2 months. I think I've already been back to Dallas 3 times, and he's been back 4 in
Yeah,
two
that's
months.
crazy.
Yeah, it's a lot. But it's really exciting. I think it's a good time for our girls who are 13 and 16. So one is at Concordia University, and the other's
Oh,
a
well,
second-year high schooler.
okay. Well,
Mm.
2 more years. That's crazy. Libby, this has been really great. I really appreciate it. And we'll get this out probably sooner rather than later. So I would like to promote Dino Valley a little bit if some people can hear about it. Of
Never turned down getting the word out about my events. And also,
course.
you got all the dirt out of me. I think I actually gave it up pretty willingly.
Yeah, you did. And I could have asked some harder questions, but you just seem to be open. And I appreciate that.
I'm always up for talking about where I've been in this world because I feel like I've definitely seen some shit.
Yeah, maybe next time you come on, we'll talk the business of trail running and having these kind of races and what it takes to put them on, the inside scoop of how you're doing that.
I would
Because-
totally talk the transparency of it because, like, people don't
Yeah,
realize I just paid a $6,000 porta potty bill for this race in 3 weeks.
exactly. Like,
And
well, see, nobody thinks about that. They just think, hey, there's porta potties, I'm going to use it. Like, not how much did it cost or what went into all that and parking, getting permits, how much money you have. I don't, you have to talk about money, but more around just the business of it and how, how to put one on and things like that. That'd be,
yes, or even
man, I'd
just
be
the
interested.
timeline. People think, oh, like we start a race, we finish a race.
Yeah.
And instead, the actual itemized timeline for Dino Valley is about 80 items at a high level. And it's
Yeah.
not
See,
like it's almost minute to minute. Yeah.
it's crazy. We won't get into that today, but thanks, Libby, for coming on to DFW Running Talk. Everyone, please rate and review us if you like this. I know I'll get Libby to rate and review this as well. Right after this is published, I'm going to say, hey, Libby, rate and review us. Don't forget.
No, I got you. Thank you for having me on, Chris.
Of course. All right. Take care and we'll talk soon.
Okay. Thanks.